Bible study this morning. We have a lot of people that's out, a lot of sickness, a lot of strep throat, sinus, congestion, and we have those traveling too. So I want to remember all those in our prayers. I know the Schultzes have been battling it, the Griffiths have been battling it, and not sure about Ryan and Jody this morning.
They'll be here later.
Huh?
They're
going to be here later. Okay, that's good. Okay. All right, so anyway, we want to remember all these people in our prayers. Jeff, will you open us with a word of prayer?
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. Thank you for being able to be here and study a portion of your word today. I ask that you be with Bobby and as he brings the word to us. We certainly ask that you be with all those that are sick and help them get well enough to be back here again at the next time. Be with those traveling and watch over them. We ask you, Lord, that you'll be with us as we go through this study and help us take it and use it in our lives. We ask that this time will be with us, and these things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. This morning we'll just do a brief review of Exodus chapter 17. We kind of did it ad lib last week, and I'm just going to kind of briefly blow back through it, maybe a couple of points that I missed, and we'll move on into Exodus chapter 18 and verse 1, where Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brings his wife and children to meet Moses. And then we'll go through that. And may bleed over into Exodus chapter 19 a little bit, but we'll see as this unfolds. When we take a look at this, last week we did talk about Exodus chapter 17 and the events that were going on there in Exodus chapter 17. One of the things that we talked about is the location of where the children of Israel are currently at. They're camped somewhere in this area here between the wilderness of Sin and the Sinai wilderness, and there is Mount Sinai. So I just kind of took a stab and drove and kind of put a pointer there about where they're at. We know they're around getting close to or right at the start of what would be considered Mount Sinai. So we talked about that. And in Exodus chapter 17, we talked about Amalek, the grandson of Esau. It talks about Amalek and how Amalek is going to attack Israel. And we talked about Amalek and him attacking Israel. We find that Amalek is the grandson of Esau in Genesis chapter 36 and verse 12. So it's kind of interesting that, in a sense, that all these people are distant cousins, you know. And so we find that this Amalek is going to be a type, a shadow of defeating sin. And in the future, Amalek is going to be completely destroyed. We also talked about Aaron and Hur staying the hands of Moses until the going down of the sun. And so we find that there was help in this as Moses, I'm not going to take the pointer back over there, but he's sitting on a rock being held up by Aaron and Hur. And we talked about that in great detail. When we take a look at this and who these people are, we know that Aaron, he's a spokesman for Moses, and we talked about that in earlier chapters and through on. But what was real interesting was about this character Hur that's helping Aaron hold up Moses' arms. And don't really have a lot of information on him in the Bible, but when you go to Josephus and some of his writings in Antiquity of the Jews, Josephus penned that this Hur was Moses' sister's husband. Now, we'll take that with a grain of salt. I thought that was just interesting that Josephus would write that. The Bible does not say that. You strictly go to circular history to find that. But it is kind of interesting when you take a look at it. We know that when we take a look at this, we find that an altar is built here at this location, and it's titled Jehovah Nissi, which means the Lord is our banner. Psalms chapter 60 and verse 4, we found a parallel verse where it talks about the psalmist David, the Lord being their banner. And we know also references made in Isaiah chapter 11 and verse 10 about this same thought. In Exodus chapter 17, verses 14 and 16, you'll see up there in the corner of this picture, therefore the wicked will not stand in judgment, and our sinners in the assembly of the righteous. And that's what that's talking about there is going to talk about Amalek and the problems with Amalek and who he is and what has gone on there. We find in verse 16, God is going to continue his war against them, but gave them much time to repent of their sin of attacking their cousin Israel. What that is about, and there's going to be a point in time where Amalek will not be remembered. And we're going to find that in Deuteronomy chapter 25 here in just a minute. Amalek had special gift and shame. First nation to make war against Israel. They went out of their way to attack Israel, and they were fighting against God. Now let's turn to Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 16 through 19. Gives us a little better picture of the issue that God has with Amalek. Notice what it says here in verse 25, beginning at verse 16. For all that do such things and all that do unrighteously are an abomination unto the Lord. Remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way, when ye were come forth out of Egypt, how he met thee by the way, smote the hindmost of thee. So he attacked them from where? From the rear, where the weak and the feeble and all those were. Even that were feeble behind thee, and when thou wast faint and weary, and he feared not God. So Amalek didn't fear God. And as we said, these people are at least distant cousins to each other through Esau. And so what do we find? What was God's thought about Amalek attacking Israel? Therefore it shall be, when the Lord thy God hath given thee rest from all thine enemies around about, in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance to possess it, that thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Thou shalt not forget it. We're looking at Amalek here, has a type of sin. And maybe we see this reference in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 7, and Romans chapter 7 about the war against the flesh and the spirit. And we find that it seems like that Israel had to battle Amalek off and on in their fight to stay God's people. And so we find there may be a shadow that we see in this. Because of God's strong command to battle against Amalek until they were completely destroyed, many see that Amalekites are a picture of our flesh, the unspiritual aspect of man that makes war against the spirit. And you can see a thought of that, and maybe this is maybe the thought that the Apostle Paul had in mind in Galatians chapter 5. If I can get out of Ephesians. Galatians chapter 5. And notice what he says here. Galatians chapter 5. Now, he said, this I say, I'm going to start at verse 16. This I say, walk in the Spirit. You shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. So walking in the Spirit is walking in the Word. The lust of the flesh here has to deal with the law or the flesh. Notice verse 17. For the flesh lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary the one to the other, so you cannot do the things that you would. And we know the Apostle Paul goes into detail about that when he's talking about all those eye of the flesh and eye of the Spirit and all those things in the book of Romans. And so we find this leads us up to Exodus chapter 18. And here in Exodus chapter 18, we're going to find several things going on, and we made brief mention about Jethro's going to bring Moses' wife and his children. We're going to find that Moses entertains Jethro, and we're going to find Jethro gives Moses counsel, and it's wise counsel. And it's real interesting about who Jethro is when we begin to look at the history of this man. And of course, in the end, Jethro is going to depart. Exodus chapter 18, who is Jethro? Who is Jethro? So we'll begin kind of reading and picking up at that point there. Who is Jethro? Notice what the Bible says here. And I'm going to read a little bit. When Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, and that the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt, then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back, and her 2 sons, of which the name of the one was Gershon, for he said, I have been an alien in a strange land, and the name of the other was Eleazar, for the God of my father said he was mine help, and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife unto Moses into the wilderness, where he was encamped at the Mount of God. So here we have them here now, encamped somewhere around the Mount of God. And like I say, that map was just an idea of putting it all together when you look at the map, maybe where that location was. And so they're somewhere in the area of that mount. Moses has not went up into the mount yet, but they're somewhere in the area of that mount. You know what's interesting is Jethro was a priest of Midian, and you know when we take a look at that, let me come on down through here, being the priest of Midian in verse 1. When you look at where the location of this Midian's at, we find that it's located somewhere over here on the east side of the Gulf of Aqaba. Here we're going to find Mount Sinai here on the Sinai Peninsula. So that's the thought of where this Midian was located at. Somewhere in all this, Moses, in his thought maybe during the plagues, had sent his wife and his 2 sons back to his father-in-law, to her dad. No doubt because of all the things was unfolded, you know, for their safety, because a lot of this was still uncertain of what was going on. And so we find, as we look at this, like I say, that stretch right there is known as the Gulf of Aqaba. There's the Red Sea. And that arrow there is showing where the Mount Sinai would be located. And so we have, this seems to be where Jethro is from. Who is Jethro? Well, we talked about him being priest of Midian. He's a descendant of Abraham by Keturah. Genesis 25 and verse 2. Let's take a look at that. You know, it's kind of interesting sometimes to go back and look and see who these people are. And I know we've been studying as we go through this, and there's a lot of times genealogy given it. And, you know, that's a study within its own self. So some of the high points sometimes we pick up on when we look at the genealogy of these people. And so we find here, Genesis 25 and verse, I'll begin reading at verse 1 because this is Abraham's second wife after Sarah has died. Then again, Abraham took a wife, her name was Keturah, and she bare him Zimran, Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Isabak, and Shurah. So it kind of gives that genealogy there. And so this gentleman here is a descendant of Abraham. You know, one of the things that we have studied in times past when we begin to talk about Abraham, you know, he's actually the father of, I guess, 3 of the most prominent religions historically and biblically that has existed, except for one, biblically. You know, he's the father of the Jewish nation, isn't he? He's the father of the Jews. He's also the father of Christianity, isn't he? And he's also the father of Islam. And the only time that comes into play is when it begins to talk about Hagar and Ishmael, and you have to go there and look at it kind of deep to discover that that's who these people are. So, you know, Abraham had a lot of descendants, didn't he? Well, you know, if you look at his fleshly descendants, what did God say? Your descendants are going to be like what? The stars of the sky. And they were fleshly. And you can look at that from a spiritual standpoint too, that his descendants spiritually are like that down through the ages. And so we find that this is who Jethro is. He is a descendant of Abraham through Keturah. And of course, he's Moses' father-in-law, as we said already. He's going to bring Moses' wife and sons to him, and that we just read, Zipporah and his sons Gershon and Eleazar. And so we find that he talked about the name of those children here. doesn't it? He talks about the reason that he had named them. The two sons are Gershom. He said, I have been an alien in a strange land. Have you ever noticed how these names that they pick is in reference to their life or some event or some thing that has gone wrong? And it's true, Moses had been a stranger in a land that was not known to him in Egypt, hadn't he? And notice something else it says here about the name of the other was Eliezer, for the God of my father said he was mine help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. How about that? So that's why that child is named. It was a notable event in the life of Moses, wasn't it? And the way these children are named. And so, we said in verse 5, somewhere in all this, Moses had sent his wife and his sons back to Egypt. Now, there is some question when you look at this in the chronological order because it brings up this Eliezer, and it says that God had delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Some think that the chronological here of this is, on this particular statement, is a little bit out of the norm for what's going on here, that Moses inserted that in here, which would come up later in the book of Numbers and the book of Deuteronomy about this event here, okay? And I don't want to get there because we're going to get there, but so anyway, Moses does bring this in here. And so we know he wasn't delivered from Pharaoh into when. So, a lot of times when you look at that, you have to ask that, when was this son born and how did this happen? Did he send them away while she was expecting, things of that nature? So you'll find all types of thoughts out there on it. The Bible tells us this about it. Jethro brought Moses' wife and his two sons back to him. Okay? That we know for a fact. That's Bible. Okay? So, and that's what we're looking for, is what does the Bible say? And in verse 6, he said unto Moses, I am thy father-in-law Jethro, am coming to thee and thy wife and her two sons. And Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, and he did obeisance and kissed him, and they asked each other of their welfare, and they came into his tent. One of the things we see about Moses, he's a humble man, isn't he? Notice how he has addressed Jethro in humility and in respect. And Moses was a great leader himself, wasn't he? Moses could have took the big head and said, well, I was in Egypt, and I had the authority and power that I had, and I more than likely had the throne of Egypt in my hand, and now I'm leading all these people. Look at who I am. But he didn't, did he? He was very humble and meek about it, and Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, and we find that he gave him obeisance and kissed him, and they asked each other of their welfare, and came into the tent. In his own right, who was Jethro? Priest of Midian. And what we're going to see here, being a descendant through Abraham, it looks like that Jethro was a priest after God. Because we're going to see the advice that he gives Moses, some of the things that he does, so it takes on the appearance that he was a worshiper of the God in heaven. And we'll get to that here in just a minute. And so we find that Moses, in verse 8, told his father-in-law all the Lord had done unto Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and all the travail that come upon them, and how the Lord delivered them. So Jethro rehearsed the whole thing to him. But I'll pause right there. Brother Con, you or Jeff or Reed, any of y'all any brother got anything you want to add, take away from so far? And so we find that Jethro gives God the glory in verse 10. He's talking about recognizing the Lord as the great God. And notice what he does here. Okay? Notice what's going to happen here. And Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord, who hath delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of Pharaoh, who had delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. And so we find that he makes a great, and we've talked about this sometimes, about these people and their recognition of God. We've talked about other characters in the Bible that would mention God, acknowledging, God of the Lord, but they're heathen in nature. And a lot of times when they're doing that, they know there's something different that's going on, and they are recognizing the fact that something is happening here, okay? Do they acknowledge the true and living God like they should? You know, even Pharaoh wanted Moses to do what as he was telling him to get out of Egypt. He wanted him to bless him, didn't he? Well, you know, maybe that blessing in the eyes of Pharaoh was not so much an acknowledgement of the God of heaven working through Moses as the fact of, Moses, oh, God, if you get out of here. You know, that would be a big blessing to me if you just get out of here, you know. But anyway, that's just another thought on it. So, and what you're seeing here is the recognizing of a singularity of God. Are you recognizing this God has one of the many gods that you will worship? And so there is some thought down that line. But here with Jethro, it seems like that he is going to be a worshiper of God. We're going to see an event that's going to happen here in just a minute. Verse 10, I just read that, but I'm going to read it again. And Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord, who hath delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, who hath delivered the people from under the hand of Egypt. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods. What a powerful statement for him to make. So, you know, you kind of see a picture here. He is aware of the God of heaven. He has done sacrifices to this, and we're going to see that here in just a minute. And yet notice how he says it's greater than all the gods, which is a true statement. So, you know, you have to ask yourself the question what is his real thought on that? Is he recognizing the God of heaven has one of many gods? Or is he recognizing the God of heaven has the true God? Well, you know, based on this statement and what's going to happen here in just a minute, it looks like he's recognizing the God of heaven has the true God, and all these other gods are pale in comparison. Because no doubt, in the region that where he was at, they were well aware of all these Egyptian gods, and we talked about those, didn't we? The Egyptians had many gods. You know, we talked about how when Moses was performing the miracles that God had told him to do, that he was attacking those Egyptian gods, wasn't he? And we looked at those by name. I think we had a handout on them. 9 of those gods that he attacked there with this. And even when he went here to cross the Red Sea, the point where where the Red Sea was crossed at, there was a sea god there, a maritime god there that they worshiped. So why didn't that God stop the parting of the Red Sea? Why didn't that God protect the Egyptian army? So you still see a lot of this going on. So here we find that Jethro, if he didn't already realize it, does realize it now that the God of heaven is a God greater than all gods because of what he had done. For anything wherein they dealt proudly, he was above them. You know, these gods, the Egyptians esteemed them with a lot of pride, didn't they? You know, they were proud of their gods. You know, they thought it was the greatest son. And if I remember correctly, and I didn't make a note of it, it's just a mental note in the back of my mind, somewhere around the Egyptians we talked about had like 2,000 different gods they recognized, okay? Historians tell us, because they always find a different shrine, a different god over there while they dig it, and they had just a whole host. And, you know, we talked about that from the standpoint that seems unusual, doesn't it? Or does it? You know, you find many years ago, and I still have a copy of the Gospel Minutes from many years ago, a question was asked down that line about why there's so many different religious bodies. And one of the things Brother Thurman brought out in that was at that time, and I guess this has been 30 years ago, 25 years ago anyway, was the fact that there was like 300 major religious bodies evolving around the name of Christ. Now he said out of that, they're like over 1,200 minor ones. Because, you know, some of these major bodies, they'll have first, second, third, missionary, free will, so on and so forth. It'd just be a whole list that goes on and on and on and on and on. So it's kind of unusual. What about all the non-under the banner of Christianity gods there are? Not that far-fetched, is it? You know, when you stop and look at it, you know, reading the Bible class on our Wednesday night in Acts 17, we talked about when Paul was there at Mars Hill, and they had all those shrines and temples, didn't they? Not that unusual, Jeremy. So it's not that outlandish as we think it may be. And notice verse 12. This is where the idea that Jethro was already a believer in God. Because notice what he does in verse 12. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and sacrifices for God. And Aaron came, and all the elders of Israel, to eat bread with Moses, his father-in-law, before God. What did Jethro do? He offered sacrifices, didn't he, to the God of heaven. And you know, that's not something you just do abstractly, is it? That's not something that just happened. You know? And considering who he was, it looks like he was well aware of the God of heaven, doesn't it, to be able to do that. And with his descendantship being like it is, it was in his family genealogy anyway, wasn't it? It's kind of like Romans chapter 1 talking about the Gentile world. And you know, I think a lot of that's in reference to Japheth, but others too. You know, they were without excuse for those things they were going on because, you know, they could see nature itself. But when you look back, who was Japheth? He was the son of Noah, wasn't he? Who are these people the descendants of? A lot of them from Japheth, wasn't it? So it's in their family lineage, it's in their family heritage, and that's one thing you do. It's really interesting, and I know a lot of you have done this, and I've done this to a great extent, is gone back and done a little bit of the family lineage, right? And it's real interesting at how many times the religious side of the family crops up as you go back. Kind of interesting, you know, and I knew it was there, but I didn't realize the significance of it. In the in the 1800s, along about 1850, 1860, and even into the middle of about 1950, a lot of my folks were Mormon. I have a relative that he's passed away now, an elder in the Mormon church out in Salt Lake City. And so as you go back, there's a heavy Catholic presence in our family. So you see the religious side of it does crop up as you go back and you begin to research who your family is. You know? So anyway, so when you look at this, there is good account that he was a believer in the true God. When you look at these, with the things that went on here. And it does say these sacrifices were for God. And I'll pause right there. Brother Conn, you have a comment you want to make on that?
Sir?
You have a comment you want to make on that?
Yeah, I want to make a comment.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I want to say that verse we just got through there, verse 12, says when took this burnt offering and sacrifice for God, and Aaron came, all the elders of Israel to eat bread before the Lord with Moses and his father-in-law to eat bread before God. Now, I just want to say that according to Deuteronomy 12 and 8, 12, I believe it's 6, 7, Deuteronomy 6, 7, says that is an act of worship.
Yep.
To eat bread before God and all, and you know, rehearse all the good things that the Lord has done for you. And that's what they were doing, one to the other. Jethro was telling him, Moses, all that the Lord done. Moses was telling Jethro all that the Lord had done. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, well, that's good, and maybe there's tie in there too, because this morning, what are we gonna eat before the Lord? What are we gonna eat before the Lord in the spiritual church? Spiritual Israel, the bread, aren't we?
Yeah,
Yeah, kinda still there, as a part of worship, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah, so, very good, very interesting. And when, notice verse 13, it came to pass on the morrow that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood by Moses from the morning until the evening. So, we're gonna get into this part now to where Moses is judging the people from morning, to evening, okay? Huge task, huge burden. You gotta remember, there's a lot of people here, for him to be judge of, so, when you think about morning to evening, back then, basically people worked from what? Daylight to dark, didn't it? It wasn't an 8-hour shift that he's pulling here. So basically, from the time the sun cracked to it started going down, what was he doing? He had a heavy burden on him, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
A very heavy burden. And notice what it says here, verse 14.
Fixing to get some good advice.
He's gonna get some real good
He's
advice.
fixing to get some shown up good advice.
Yeah. Verse 14, and when Moses, his father-in-law, saw all that he did to the people, he said, what is this thing that thou doest to the people? Why sittest thyself alone, and all the people stand by thee from morning unto evening? You're doing this by yourself. Why are you doing this? And Moses said, because, verse 15, unto his father-in-law, because the people come unto me to inquire of God. He said, that's why I'm doing it. That's why I'm standing here among this, because the people are inquiring, basically, what would God have me to do? So Moses was the judge, wasn't he? He's going to be the lawgiver. Here, when we get over to about chapter 20. Verse 16, when they have a matter, they come unto me, and I judge between one and another, and I do make them know the statutes of God and his laws. And so here we have Moses telling his father-in-law, I do this because they need to know what they need to do in the eyes of God, his statutes and his laws. And Moses' father-in-law said unto him, the thing thou doest is not good. He could see Jethro, the weight that was on Moses trying to do all this by himself. How would you do that? Upwards of maybe, a couple to 3 million people. So what are you talking about? Probably 1 million adult problems at least. Wow. You could do that from morning to night, from now on, and not cover all that territory. So Jethro said, why are you doing this? And this is another reason why it stopped that Jethro was a true priest of God, is because of the wisdom he's going to spell out here to Moses. Like an advice giver, if you will. Jeremy?
Let's say, going back to verse 12, with that Aaron recognizes Jethro as a priest, or he wouldn't
Right.
be engaged with him. And
True.
then it also speaks to their godliness, and that they can meet together, talk together,
As one, can't they?
and as one, and talk about these things,
Yeah.
which leads to the wise counsel that he's about to
Yeah.
receive.
So, So, and so we find that in verse 18, we're going to find that Moses' father-in-law is going to give him some, and start his advice, verses 18 through 25. But I'm going to have to move on to this, okay? I'm going to ring the buzzer the first time here in just a minute. That will surely wear away. That's what we just talked about. You could cover that, you could just and never get it covered and just be wore out. And you can't attend to anything else. This is why you have governmental structure, judgmental structure. Even in the church, you've got a hierarchy of order, so things can get done. Okay? There's responsibility that these over here have, there are responsibilities that these have, and there's responsibilities that these have. Because one person cannot do it all. One person tries to do it all, then what's going to happen to that person? They'll wear out on it.
Wear out.
They'll wear out. That's right. And you'll be no good for nothing. You can't take care of anything, because what are you? You're shot, right?
And you're not going to be good in everything, so something's going to suffer.
That's right.
Not be up to
That's
standard.
right. Something's going to suffer.
And you see this in the early Christian church up till today, division of labor or leadership, deacon, elder,
Right,
member.
members, yeah, right, right, right. For this thing is too heavy for thee. Thou art not able to form it thyself alone. Hearken now unto my voice. I will give thee counsel, and God shall be with thee. Be thou for the people to godly, and that thou mayest bring the causes unto God. So he's telling us, it's okay for you to be the mediator and the intercessor, but you're going to have some help in all this. And thou shalt teach them ordinances and laws, and shalt show them the way wherein they must walk, and the work that they must do. Moreover, thou shalt provide out of all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, place them over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, and rulers of 10, and let them judge the people at all seasons. Notice how this is done. The qualifications of these men, not just anybody, right? And really, when you look at these qualifications, isn't that some of the same qualifications that God looks for today in the men that are elders and deacons and those that are active in the church? Some of the same qualifications, isn't it? Jeremy?
I think the key is verse 20 is teach them the decrees and laws, because a lot of times if you're aware of what the standard or the boundaries are, that cuts out a lot of the dispute.
Oh, exactly.
Should.
Right, right. You gotta have structure, haven't you? Without structure, what you got? Chaos, haven't you? Yeah. Verse 22. And it shall be that every great matter that shall bring unto thee, but every small matter they shall judge. So see, Moses had the wisdom and the intercessorship with God to judge what? The weightier matters, right? These other guys, since they know the boundary or the structure or what is to be done, they can judge the smaller matters. And so we find a type of governmental judge structure being put in place. Verse 23, if thou shalt do this thing, and God commanded thee so, then thou shalt be able to endure, and all the people shall also go to their place in peace. Because of what? Because of the help. You shifted some of the burden and responsibility onto those that have the qualifications and skills to help you get this thing done. And notice what Moses did in verse 24. What did he do? So Moses hearkened. He listened, didn't he? He paid attention to his father-in-law. He hearkened to the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he said. That was some wise counsel, that would. And to do. So there again, that tells us that Jethro was not your ordinary person that was running his household or his tribe, was he? He had a lot of sense, didn't he? About it. And Moses chose able men out of Israel and made them head over the people, rulers of thousands, rulers of 100, rulers of 50, and rulers of 10. And they judged the people at all seasons. The hard causes they brought unto Moses, but every small matter they judged themselves. And that's the way God put that structure in order. So Moses was able to do these things for him. He set up this judgment, a type of governmental thing that we just talked about. And we find in verse 27, Jethro leaves. Jethro's going to leave and go back home now. His mission is accomplished. And Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went his way into his own land. So he went back home, did he? That wasn't just a coincidence, was it? He was God's man at the time, place, and purpose that God needed him, wasn't he? He sure was. Be able to give that advice and to do those things. We'll stop right there. We'll pick up at chapter 19, Jim.
Thousands, hundreds, 50s, and 10s is our modern military setup too today.
Yeah, right. And we're going to see that, as these people are, because you're going to have, what you get into is your captain structure, your sergeant structure, your captains, and things of that nature. So, yeah, that's right. So next week we'll pick up at chapter 19.